the government of Pakistan announced that they are now going to be launching a new grand operation which they titled as Operation Azm-e-Istehkam. The Pakistani approach to anti-insurgency operations or counter-insurgency operations is a scorched earth approach. It means basically that you're trying to do too much and you're going to probably end up doing either nothing at all or whatever little you do, it will not be enough. And Imran Khan, of course, earlier had even lauded the Taliban system of justice. They were literally as thick as thieves with the military establishment. This was an operation which has come on the back of enormous Chinese pressure. Chinese have pressed the Pakistani leadership to carry out another operation, Azm or Raddul Fasad, to ensure that the terrorists are eliminated. Now, when the story was released, it was immediately censored. Pakistanis cannot say no to China because Chinese are the only game in town. They are the only people who still are ready to invest some money in Pakistan. The Chinese have replaced the Americans as Pakistan's sugar daddies. A couple of days back, the government of Pakistan announced that they are now going to be launching a new grand operation which they titled as Operation Azm-e-Istehkam. Azm is resolve, Istehkam is stability, and this was supposed to be a follow-up operation to more than a dozen operations, military operations against the terrorists which Pakistan has carried out since around 2007. Some of them have been pretty big, like Azm, which was launched in 2014, which started in North Waziristan and then was extended to some other areas. And then later on, another operation which was announced by the former army chief Qamar Bajwa, which was called Raddul Fasad, which basically was to be carried out throughout the country, but it was more of an intelligence based operation. Very sharp surgical strikes against terror networks. But these operations have been carried out for many years now. And frankly, the tide of terrorism has ebbed and flowed in Pakistan, but it hasn't ended. And it hasn't ended for reasons that we will come to in a bit. When this latest operation was announced, it was done with a lot of serious faces. This so-called National Apex Committee, in which the military top brass and the civilian top brass, along with all the chief ministers and everybody, was part of the deliberations. And then after that, this operation was announced, and with the usual seriousness, those expressions of resolve and what have you. And of course, the usual Pakistani bombast that accompanies such declarations. Now, it was announced, and immediately there was a lot of flurry of speculation of what exactly this operation meant, because from whatever was released by the government, it appeared that this this was going to be a very ambitious operation. It was going to be a very comprehensive, all-encompassing operation, which would at one level declare total war on the terrorists and their networks and their sanctuaries, which meant also across the border. At least that's the impression which one got. And along with it, there would be very targeted intelligence-based operations. It would involve judicial reforms, legal reforms. It had an economic component so that you could rehabilitate people who were dislocated or displaced, which also meant that you were going to carry out the kind of scorched earth operations which Pakistan had carried out in the past. And the Pakistani approach to anti-insurgency operations or counter-insurgency operations is a scorched earth approach in which they send in, they go in all guns blazing, tanks, artillery, helicopter gunships, fighter jets, going and bombing the hell out of a place, razing villages and towns, reducing them to rubble, displacing hundreds of thousands of people. So the economic component involved rehabilitation, and then of course even more ambitiously uh, improving the economic condition of people so that economic distress levels and economic desperation does not push people into the arms of the terrorists. So this was the broad framework under which this operation was going to be carried out. So obviously, the impression which went across was that this was going to be some kind of a very, very large scale operation. Now, of course, when you make announcements like an all of country approach and that a multi-pronged kind of a thing, it means basically that you're trying to do too much and you're going to probably end up doing either nothing at all, or whatever little you do, it will not be enough. That's the track record, and there's no reason to believe that anything has changed over the years just because there's a new army chief who has come. And frankly, many of these very grand kind of declarations come a cropper when they actually start playing out on the ground. Now, clearly there was, while there was a lot of speculation as to what exactly the scale and scope of this operation is going to be, almost immediately there were voices of protest, especially from the principal opposition party, the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, which actually runs the province in which bulk of these operations are supposed to be carried out, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The government in the province is of PTI, and they are at daggers drawn with both the central government as well as they don't really have very good relations with the army. Now, in the past, the PTI, since around at least 2013, the PTI has a government in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. When the big operations like Azm-e-Istehkam and others were carried out, it was a PTI government at the provincial level, and frankly, those operations went on without much let or hindrance from the PTI side, even though the PTI always had a somewhat ambivalent kind of an attitude towards many of these terrorists. They were partly acted as, including Imran Khan. In fact, it all came down from Imran Khan. And they acted as apologists and advocates of terrorists. And Imran Khan, of course, earlier had even lauded the Taliban system of justice, and that is why he was very often addressed with the moniker of Taliban Khan. But nevertheless, those operations went on pretty seamlessly, simply because the PTI was at that point of time, literally a kind of a proxy of the army. It was, in a sense, a kind of a political proxy of the army, the next government in waiting. They were literally as thick as thieves with the military establishment. So obviously, then they were not going to do anything that was not to the liking of the military establishment. But now the situation does not seem to be the same. So obviously there were voices of opposition on what exactly this operation is. They wanted greater clarity. They wanted a discussion, a debate. They wanted to be taken into confidence. Although the chief minister of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa was part of the meeting in which, after which this operation was declared, he later on said that he wasn't aware that an operation was going to be carried out because there was no mention of any operation, and all that happened in that meeting was that there was a consensus of a kind of a resolve to combat terrorism. But there was no real talk of an operation. At least that's his claim. So there were these opposition noises, and then of course there is the great Maulana Fazlur Rahman, who with a very brilliant play of words has described Azm-e-Istehkam, which is resolve for stability, into saying that if this operation is launched, then it will end up as Adme, which means actually destabilizing rather than stabilizing the situation. So instead of Azm-e-Istehkam, it will be Adm-e-Istehkam. So that was on the political side. Very clearly, this was an operation which has come on the back of enormous Chinese pressure on the Pakistanis to clean up their act, to get political stability back in Pakistan, and to ensure security inside Pakistan, which means actually carrying out serious operations against the Taliban, who are actually running rampant in at least most of the parts of Pakistan which are on the western bank of the Indus River. So there has been a lot of Chinese pressure, and the Chinese over the years have been making it very clear that number one, they are losing a lot of money on that very duff CPEC project which they had launched with so much of fanfare. They're only losing money on that. But apart from losing money, the Chinese are also losing their lives. So they have been very, very emphatic that without security, there cannot be any further investments taking place in Pakistan. Now, last month, I think around the 28th or the 29th of May, one of the Pakistani newspapers, Business Recorder, published a story which said that the Chinese have pressed the Pakistani leadership to carry out another operation, Zarb-e-Azm or a Raddul Fasad, to ensure that the terrorists are eliminated. Now, when the story was released, it was immediately censored because the original e-paper of Business Recorder had this story as the lead story. And then after, suddenly when social media caught on and it started flashing, this story started going viral, even the e-paper changed. Although you could still get that story on the website of Business Recorder in a text form, but the e-paper does not have that story anymore. It was completely censored out. But that particular story had laid out that the Chinese have started demanding such a major operation. Now, this is not the first time that that a military action is being taken on Chinese directions. It's another matter that Pakistan is virtually a client state now of the Chinese for both political, economic and strategic reasons. The Chinese have replaced the Americans as Pakistan's sugar daddies. In the old days, it was always it was always America which called the shots, but now it's increasingly China, and the Pakistanis cannot afford to annoy the Chinese. So, way back in 2007, when the Lal Masjid operation was carried out, the Pakistanis continued to hem and haw. When the mullahs in Lal Masjid were running amok, there was no real action being taken until the mullahs actually invaded a Chinese massage parlor. It was probably a brothel, but nobody really knows. But they raided it, they kidnapped some Chinese, and there was a huge furor inside China. The Chinese came down very heavily on the Musharraf government, and that is when the operation was launched at the Lal Masjid, in which about 100 people were killed. And that is the episode which led to, or the incident which led to the creation of this umbrella organization called Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. And after that, it was a kind of a tsunami of terror strikes which hit Pakistan. So that was 2007. Later on, when Operation Zarb-e-Azm started, even that there was a lot of Chinese pressure on Pakistan. And in fact, around that time, if you look at the first, at least a week, first 10 days, the kind of press releases that were coming out from the ISPR or the news reports that were appearing, the Pakistanis were constantly telling the Chinese that we've targeted militants of ETIM or the other Uyghur groups, and so very clearly they were reaching out to the Chinese. And now, if this operation is being carried out, we don't know what this operation is going to be. I don't think even the Pakistanis who announced this operation are very clear what this is going to be. But this will also be on what the Chinese are demanding. Now, the Pakistanis cannot say no to China because Chinese are the only game in town. They are the only people who still are ready to invest some money in Pakistan. They are the guys to whom the Pakistanis are deeply in hock to. They owe them lots of money, and without Chinese rollovers of debt, Pakistan is going to be bankrupt. They will default. So there's no way you can tell no to the Chinese, and the Chinese are now quite open about it. Recently, a minister from China had visited Pakistan under a consultative mechanism which they had set up, and out there he literally had the entire political leadership sitting in front of him, and in a sense he admonished them and told them that they have to get political stability and they have to ensure the security situation is stable. So that is something which is very clear, that this is essentially a Chinese driven operation. What is the operation? And that is where the confusion starts, because as I said earlier, that the initial impression was that this is going to be a massive kind of an operation, but after these opposition voices started coming out, and the opposition voices, of course, one is purely politics. There's been a lot of repression, violation of human rights, invasion of privacy, the worst kind of fascism that the Pakistan army has visited upon its former allies and proxies, the PTI. They've invaded their houses, they've broken their houses, they've done all kinds of things. So one is that repression which was carried out. So this is in a sense a pushback against that from the PTI side. But there is a genuine reason as well. And that genuine reason is what I said earlier was the scorched earth operations. Now, these operations have destroyed towns and cities. They have dislocated hundreds of thousands of people. They've disrupted the economy and the lives of people out there. So clearly, politicians are very chary of going in for such grand operations. So that was, of course, a reason. And I think suddenly the penny dropped that without some kind of political consensus to go in for an operation of this scale, it's not going to be tenable. It's not going to work. So the Pakistanis have now started issuing clarifications that no, this is not a grand operation. No, this is not an all-out war. Yes, there will be some kinetic operations, but it will be mostly intelligence-based operations. Now, essentially that clarification suggests that everything which was happening until now is what is going to happen going forward, except that it might become a little more intense, but otherwise nothing really changes. And if nothing really changes in terms of the security approach to tackling terrorism, then what was the need for announcing this grand new name of a new project under which a lot of other things are going to happen? Doesn't make sense. Or does it? This is probably an ego trip of Azm-e-Istehkam, who's being pilloried, probably the most hated army chief in Pakistan. Certainly the least respected guy, probably has a tough competition with Qamar Bajwa in his last days as army chief. I think he's even worse than Qamar Bajwa in some ways. He's being pilloried. The army seems to be divided. The politics is certainly divided. And clearly this is an operation which I think the Pakistan army thinks that, maybe it's Azm Munir hankering for trending with the hashtag thank you Asim Munir or something to that effect. Maybe it's something like that. So it's an ego trip, and he probably wants that just like some of his predecessors had operations to their name, he too should have an operation which is associated with his name. One is that. Uh, but other than that, it doesn't really add up what this operation is going to be all about. And we will get to know in the next couple of weeks as to what exactly or where the direction in which this operation is headed. There are a couple of spoilers in this entire operation, if at all they're going in for one. The first is, of course, the political side of things, that without a political consensus, an operation becomes untenable. It's not going to work on the ground. The second is, of course, the economic costs associated with an operation. Now, the moment you launch a very large-scale kind of an operation, it involves very serious costs. And given the parlous state of Pakistan's economy, do they have the kind of money to go into a long, drawn-out military operation, an operation without end? This is a kind of an endless war that they have entered into. Do they have the kind of resources to enter into such a war? And maybe they do. But the problem is that you will have to then start cutting corners from other allocations which you have made. And already it's a very bare bones kind of a situation as far as Pakistan's fiscal side is concerned. So I'm not very sure if they have really the money. The third part of it is also economic, which is that the moment you have large-scale operations in Pakistan and terrorism becomes the talk of town, it spooks investors. This is a time when the Pakistanis are desperately trying to attract some kind of investment, some kind of inflows of foreign funds which are not debt creating, and they are desperate for it. And if you have a large scale kind of a military operation, it will spook the investors. They are not going to come until the situation settles down. Now, Pakistan's economic problem is immediate. You can't say that, okay, fine, the investors can come, we'll assure them security. Nobody takes Pakistani assurances seriously. The Chinese have also stopped taking their assurances seriously. So, you can forget about investment if you go in for a large scale project. And finally, in fact, not finally, but there is another factor which is going to be there is, of course, of the diplomatic consequences. There is no way you can get a handle over terrorism until and unless you settle Afghanistan. And if that means that the Pakistanis are going to extend the war into Afghanistan, then they get sucked into the Afghan vortex. Like many others, more powerful nations before them have gotten sucked in, and there might be some temporary advances that they make, but eventually it's a headless retreat. And surely the Pakistanis know it, or maybe they don't, because if you are in the Pakistan army and you are suffused with the hubris that accompanies an occupying army like the Pakistan army, then you don't take the rest of the consequences very seriously, and especially if it's an army which is prone to taking some very serious risks in carrying out adventurism, military adventurism. So there is that Afghanistan angle, and without getting the Afghanistan angle straight, I don't see how getting into a large-scale operation is really going to be of any great help. The fifth aspect of this entire thing is what happens on the India front. Now, at a time when the Pakistanis have started ramping up tensions with India, Azm Munir has let it be known to everybody that he is going to make sure that Kashmir remains destabilized. He is not ready to back down on export of terrorism into Kashmir, notwithstanding whatever confabulations might be happening on the back channel, track 2, whatever else you might call it. It's very clear that the Pakistanis are unreformed and unreconstructed insofar as Kashmir is concerned, which means that if your tensions with India start ramping up and there's greater military pressure on your eastern front, and at a time when you are getting involved on both your western front and your internal front, then you are facing what might be called a three-front situation. And can the Pakistan army really manage and afford that? So I think that is another question that will come to the fore. Finally, and most importantly, is the ideological question. Now, the Pakistanis have been known to flirt with Islamic radicalism, Islamist terrorism. They have propped up these groups, they have supported them, they back terror groups around the world, and of course in Pakistan, provided those terror groups work as proxies of the Pakistan army, advance the foreign policy interests of Pakistan, act as instruments of state policy, both internally and externally. And from India's experience, we know that many of these terror groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed and others are basically Pakistan army proxies. Now, you can't be creating a kind of an environment which is conducive for these terrorists, these jihadists, which you want to utilize and use as instruments against your adversaries outside Pakistan, but you don't want them to do anything inside Pakistan. It doesn't work because there is an entire ecosystem which is created in which all kinds of elements will come in. So there is this major ideological question which the Pakistanis have not been able to address. And forget about just using the terrorist organization, the jihadist terror organizations. The Pakistanis have actually weaponized Islam within Pakistan. They have allowed organizations like the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan to run rampant inside Pakistan, to threaten their adversaries, to act as a kind of a street force against their adversaries. Now, once you are allowing something like this to happen within the country and you are not ready to clamp down on them because either you find the utility in these elements or you are too scared to take them on, then how are you ever going to be able to take on the other elements like the TTP or the Baloch freedom fighters or some of the other disaffected groups or even some of the international terror groups which are probably operating from Afghanistan and which want to actually bring Islam to Pakistan. And frankly, if you ask many of the Afghans, especially the Taliban, including the Pakistani Taliban, they will say Pakistan is technically not an Islamic country. So Pakistan is being hoisted on its own petard when it comes to Islam, and the hobby horse that they have made of Islam as their ideological foundation. And clearly, until the Pakistanis are ready to resolve this fundamental contradiction in their system, in their state and their society, I don't see how these operations are going to be of any help in getting rid of the menace of terrorism. And until you get rid of terrorism, everything else, economic revival, political stability, it's a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. But I don't really see any real serious rethink in Pakistan on the kind of direction it wants to take. So what you will have is typical cosmetic measures like an operation here, some resolution passed there, stuff like that, which at the end of the day really does not address the problem.